Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly out of your modern room and into a medieval street, where the air is thick with wood smoke, damp wool, and livelihoods, and the faint tang of something you can't quite identify but decide not to question. You're standing under a flickering candle, its flame bending and shivering as if it's already tired, and you realize that beauty here isn't something you scroll past. It's something you survive by. Faces glow unevenly in the low light, half shadowed, half imagined, and first impressions matter because there are no second chances, no filters, and definitely no soft focus lenses. You probably won't survive this with your modern skincare routine intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. It's oddly comforting knowing where everyone is drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start walking, boots scraping against uneven stone, and you quickly understand that medieval beauty standards are not abstract ideas. They're practical signals. Beauty here whispers things like healthy, fertile, wealthy, and most importantly, not about to die. In a world where illness is common and life expectancy is, let's call it, optimistic, appearance becomes sure than for survival. A clear complexion suggests you've avoided recent plagues. Straight posture hints you haven't been bent double by years of backbreaking labor. Even the way someone moves tells a story about how well they're eating. This is a mainstream historical fact historians largely agree on. Medieval beauty is deeply tied to health and class, far more than pure aesthetics. As you pass by a group of townsfolk, you notice how light defines everything. There are no bright rooms here, only firelight, candles, and the occasional shaft of sun. Beauty is designed for dim conditions. Pale skin reflects light better. Light-colored fabrics glow softly. Even facial features seem judged by how they catch a flicker rather than how they look head-on. Historians still argue whether medieval ideals were consciously shaped by lighting conditions, or whether this was simply a side effect of class-based living. But the result is the same: subtlety matters. You pause near a wooden stall, pretending to browse while actually people watching. A woman with smooth, very pale skin draws lingering glances. It's not just that she's considered beautiful. It's that her skin suggests she doesn't work outdoors. Pale skin equals leisure, and leisure equals status. You make a mental note that sunscreen is technically already a medieval obsession, just with worse ingredients and no SPF number. Somewhere down the line this will get weirder, but for now, you just nod along. The men aren't exempt from this silent evaluation either. Broad shoulders suggest strength, but not too much bulk. Too muscular might imply manual labor. A well-groomed beard hints at maturity and stability, while wild hair suggests either artistic temperament or that you've lost control of your life. It's a delicate balance, and you realize beauty standards here are less about perfection and more about signaling you belong in a very specific social lane. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts as you watch a young man carefully adjusting his tunicky. Mirrors are rare and expensive. Most people don't see themselves clearly ever. Beauty standards are learned almost entirely through other people's reactions. Compliments, glances, whispered judgments. This is how you know where you stand. Imagine building your entire self-image based on vibes alone. Honestly, medieval confidence might be the most impressive thing here. You keep moving, and the street narrows, the buildings leaning inward like they're eavesdropping. You notice that beauty is also moralized. A pleasant appearance is often believed to reflect a pleasant soul. This idea has deep roots in medieval thinking, reinforced by religious teachings and classical philosophy rediscovered through manuscripts. A beautiful face is assumed to belong to a good person. Awkward for anyone who just woke up on the wrong side of the straw mattress. Historians still argue whether people truly believed this or simply used it as a convenient excuse to judge others quickly, but either way, the assumption sticks. There's a soft humor to it all, even if no one here would phrase it that way. You imagine someone tripping in the mud and instantly losing 3 points of attractiveness because clumsiness doesn't scream divine harmony. That's joke 1 for the night, and it lands quietly like everything else here. As you reach a small square, you see a cluster of candles arranged around a shrine. Faces gather, expressions softened by reverence. Beauty standards don't disappear in religious spaces, they intensify. Modesty becomes part of attractiveness. Cleanliness, or at least the appearance of it, signals spiritual discipline. You realize that medieval beauty is never just personal, it's social, spiritual, and political all at once. No pressure. You take a breath, slow and deep, letting the atmosphere settle. Smoke curls upward, bells toll faintly in the distance, and the entire world feels smaller, closer, more intimate. This is a place where beauty is fleeting, judged quickly, and remembered longer than you'd like. And as you continue walking, you understand that every choice, from how you stand to how you cover your hair, feeds into this silent language. Somewhere ahead, the standards will get stranger, the recipes more alarming, and the expectations more specific. But for now, you're just absorbing the basics, letting your modern assumptions gently dissolve. The candlelight flickers again, and you follow it forward, already half dreaming. You keep drifting forward, the street narrowing again, and the air changes. It's heavier now, warmer, carrying layers of human presence that linger long after people pass. This is where you begin to understand that cleanliness, in medieval life, is not absent. It's just interpreted differently. Despite the popular myth that everyone here never bathed, you quickly learn that people cared deeply about being clean, even if their methods would make modern plumbing faint in shock. Washing exists, but it's shaped by availability, climate, and belief rather than daily showers and aggressively scented soap. You notice a small wooden tub being dragged out behind a house. Bathing happens, but it's an event, not a routine. Water must be hauled, heated, and guarded, and once it's ready, it's often shared. Families bathe in sequence, from youngest to oldest, which is efficient and also explains a lot about medieval priorities. A mainstream historical fact slips in quietly: Hereg, public bathhouses existed across medieval Europe, especially earlier in the period, and were surprisingly social places. They declined later due to changing moral attitudes and fears about disease, but for a long time, bathing was normal enough. Smell becomes the real marker of beauty. You realize that attractiveness isn't about being odorless, that's unrealistic, but about smelling right. Natural body scent, if not overpowering, is tolerated, even expected. What matters is whether it's masked, softened, or overwhelmed by something pleasant. Herbs are everywhere. Lavender, rosemary, sage, and thyme are tucked into clothing, braided into hair, or sewn into little sachets that hang near the chest. You catch a whiff as someone passes and think, not bad, very herbal spa, minus the spa. Historians still argue whether medieval people associated good smell directly with moral goodness or simply with health, but either way, scent carries meaning. A full odor suggests illness or decay, which in a world without germ theory is terrifying. Smelling sweet becomes a signal that your body is balanced, your humors aligned, and your life not currently unraveling. No pressure. Again, you pass a woman rubbing her hands with something gritty. Soap exists, but it's harsh, often made with animal fat and lye. It cleans aggressively. Overuse can damage skin, so many people wash selectively. Hands, face, feet. Rather than full immersion, cleanliness is targeted, practical. The idea of scrubbing your entire body daily would seem excessive, possibly dangerous. You imagine trying to explain exfoliating and decide against it. That's joke 2, quietly filed away. A quirky tidbit floats up as you watch someone sprinkle water mixed with rose petals onto their clothes. Line is valued not just because it's breathable, but because it can be washed more easily than wool. Wearing clean linen underlayers becomes a proxy for bathing. Even if you can't wash your whole body, you can change what touches it. Clean clothes equal a clean person, at least visually and socially. This is one of those medieval logic leaps that actually makes sense when you think about it for more than 5 seconds. You notice how judgments happen instantly. Someone walks by with stained cuffs or a sour smell, and conversation paused just a little. Cleanliness is tied directly to respectability. It's not about luxury, it's about effort. Even poor households try to maintain some standard, washing when possible, airing clothes, using ash or sand to scrub surfaces. Beauty, again, is effort made visible. Religion threads through all of this. Cleanliness has spiritual overtones, echoing biblical ideas of purity. Washing before holy days is common, and certain saints are associated with healing and cleanliness. But there's also suspicion. Too much bathing, especially in mixed company, raises eyebrows. Beauty must never slide into indulgence. Historians still argue whether moral backlash truly caused the decline of bathhouses, or whether it was more about economics and disease outbreaks. But the tension is real either way. You pause near a well, watching someone rinse their face, water dripping down onto worn stone. Cold water, quick splashes. This is daily life. You imagine starting every morning like this and immediately miss hot showers. That's joke 3, and you feel it land softly before dissolving. Perfumes begin to make more sense now. They're not about seduction so much as survival. Incense burns indoors too. Clean. The air pomanders, small balls filled with fragrant substances, are carried to ward off disease. The belief is that bad air causes illness, so good smells must protect you. It's wrong by modern standards, but logical within its own framework. And honestly, if you had no antibiotics, you'd probably clutch a scented orange too. As you move on, the sounds fade slightly, replaced by your own footsteps and the distant echo of church bells. Cleanliness, you realize, isn't binary here. It's a spectrum of practices, intentions, and signals. Beauty doesn't demand perfection, it demands participation. Trying matters. The street opens again, and with it comes a softer breeze, carrying away the heavier scents. You breathe a little easier, settling deeper into the rhythm of this world. Ahead, the sun peeks out just enough to change how faces look, how skin reflects light, how standards sharpen. You follow that glow, already sensing that color, especially skin color, is about to mean everything. You step forward into a patch of sunlight, and immediately you feel it. The quiet tension between warmth and danger. Here, skin tone isn't just an accident of genetics, it's a biography written in light. Pale skin is prized, admired, quietly envied, because it tells a story without words. It says you stay indoors. It says you don't labor under the open sky. It says your days belong to rooms, not fields. In medieval society, this is beauty distilled into a single visual cue. You watch how people angle themselves, subtly avoiding the brightest rays. Sleeves are long even in warmer months, hats brim wide, veils draped carefully. This isn't modesty alone, it's strategy. A mainstream historical fact settles in here across medieval Europe. Lighter skin was associated with nobility and leisure, while darker, tanned skin signaled outdoor labor and lower social status. This preference shows up again and again in art, poetry, and medical writing, quietly reinforcing itself over centuries. You notice a woman adjusting a lined cloth over her arms, not because she's cold, but because she's careful. The sun is useful. It grows food. Warm stone marks time, but it's also suspicious. Too much exposure darkens skin, and darkened skin suggests a life of work. Beauty standards here don't reward strength earned outdoors. They reward the absence of visible strain. It's the opposite of modern vacation tan culture, and you briefly imagine someone proudly returning from a medieval beach trip, only to be met with polite horror. That's joke 1, drifting by like a lazy cloud. People don't just avoid the sun, they actively counteract it. You begin to hear whispers of powders and washes meant to lighten skin. Chalk, ground bone, flour, even crushed pearls if you're wealthy enough. These substances are applied carefully, sometimes daily, to maintain that coveted pallor. The goal isn't to look alive in the modern sense, it's to look untouched. Historians still argue whether this obsession with paleness was primarily about class signaling or whether it also tied into older ideas about purity and femininity. But either way, the effect is unmistakable. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you pass a small apothecary stall. You spot jars labeled with symbols rather than words, filled with pale powders. Some recipes for skin lightening include vinegar or lemon juice, not for freshness, but for their bleaching effect. Imagine willingly putting acid on your face because the sun had the audacity to exist. That's joke 2, and it lands gently before fading. Men participate in this too, though often less openly. Nobles ride horses under shade when possible, wear gloves, and let servants handle tasks that might darken their hands. Hands, you realize, are almost as telling as faces. Soft, pale hands are admired. Rough, calloused ones tell stories no amount of perfume can erase. Beauty here is about concealment as much as enhancement. Art reinforces these ideals. You recall, or rather you notice, painted figures displayed nearby. Saints, nobles, ladies of the court, nearly luminous in their paleness. Realism is less important than symbolism. Pale skin becomes shorthand for virtue, refinement, and divine favor. It's not that darker skin is considered ugly in isolation. It's that it's associated with labor, exposure, and necessity. Beauty is aspirational, and aspiration points upward. You pause in the shade of an overhang, watching sunlight spill across the street like liquid gold. People cross it quickly. He heads lowered, garments adjusted. The sun feels almost accusatory, as if it's trying to reveal something you'd rather keep hidden. You think about how much effort goes into not looking like you work, and the irony settles in quietly. That's joke 3, subtle and sleepy. Medical theory plays its part too. According to humoral theory, balance is everything. Too much heat, including heat from the sun, is believed to disrupt the body's equilibrium. Pale skin suggests calmness and control. Tanned skin implies excess heat, passion, and imbalance. Beauty, health, and temperament blur together until they're nearly indistinguishable. Historians still argue whether people truly experienced their bodies this way or whether these theories simply justified existing preferences. But the language of medicine gives beauty standards intellectual weight. You begin to notice regional variations. In southern climates, where sun exposure is unavoidable, ideals shift slightly. Complete pallor is less realistic, so emphasis moves to smoothness and even tone rather than absolute whiteness. Still, avoidance remains a goal. Parasols appear. Architecture adapts, with narrow streets and overhangs creating shade. Beauty standards quietly shape cities themselves, which is honestly impressive in a slightly alarming way. As you continue walking, clouds drift in, softening the light. Faces relax just a little. You feel the collective relief, as if everyone can stop holding their breath. The obsession with paleness isn't vanity alone, it's vigilance. Every sunny day is a test, every shadow a small victory. You realize that beauty here is something you maintain moment by moment. It's not a look you achieve and forget. It's a constant negotiation with the world around you. The sun, indifferent and persistent, keeps shining anyway. You move on, deeper into the town, carrying this understanding with you. Skin, you've learned, is a canvas that tells where you belong. And ahead, and livelihoods, you sense that people aren't satisfied with just avoiding damage. They're actively decorating that canvas, mixing colors and textures in ways that will only get more creative from here. You drift onward, away from open light and into the quieter interior spaces of medieval life, where beauty becomes something mixed, stirred, and stored in small containers. This is where cupboards, gardens, and apothecary shelves blur together, and where cosmetics are less about brands and more about improvisation. Face paints, rouges, And creams exist here, absolutely, but they come from the same places as medicine and cooking. Beauty is homemade, experimental, and deeply personal. You pause near a table where a woman is grinding something with slow, practiced movements. A mortar and pestle, steady hands, patience. She's making a paste for her cheeks, using crushed berries to add a faint flush. Redness suggests warmth and vitality, a sign of good circulation and health. Too pale and you look sickly, too red and you look overheated. The sweet spot is a soft, barely there bloom, like you've just taken a brisk walk and not collapsed afterward. This balance shows up again and again in medieval descriptions of beauty, and historians largely agree on this as a mainstream fact. You lean in slightly, catching the faint scent of herbs. Many cosmetics double as skincare, at least in intention. Rosewater is popular, believed to cool the skin and calm inflammation. Almond oil softens dryness. Honey appears in masks, valued for its smooth texture and supposed healing properties. Some of this actually works, which feels like a small victory for the past. Others less so. But we'll get there later. A quirky tidbit slips into focus as you watch someone dust their face with a pale powder made from ground chalk. And livelihoods. The goal isn't coverage in the modern sense, it's correction. You're not hiding blemishes. You're adjusting your place on the social spectrum. Makeup here is subtle by design. Anything too obvious suggests deception, and deception slides dangerously close to sin. Beauty must appear effortless, even when it clearly isn't. That's joke one, hovering gently in the air. You notice that cosmetics are often gendered, but not rigidly. Women are more openly associated with face paints and creams, but men use them too, especially among the upper classes. A nobleman might apply powder to reduce shine or darken his brows slightly to frame his eyes. Eyes are important. Clear, bright eyes signal alertness and good health. Belladonna, derived from deadly nightshade, is sometimes used to dilate pupils, making eyes appear larger and more luminous. Historians still argue how widespread this practice actually was, but even the possibility isn't enough. You blink a little longer than usual. You pass a small shelf lined with jars, each labeled with symbols or short notes. Some contain ground flowers, others minerals, others substances you'd rather not identify yet. Cosmetics are not standardized. Recipes vary by region, household, and tradition. A mother passes down her favorite face wash to her daughter, who tweaks it slightly based on what grows nearby. Beauty knowledge is oral, handwritten, and constantly evolving. It's less industry and more folk science. There's humor in the trial and error nature of it all. Imagine applying something daily just to see if it works, with no reviews, no testers, and no refunds. That's joke two, and it lands softly like a sigh. You also notice restraint. Makeup is for enhancement, not transformation. A little color on lips, a hint of brightness on cheeks, perhaps darkening lashes with soot or charcoal. Overdoing it risks ridicule or moral suspicion. Beauty here walks a narrow line between care and vanity, and livelihoods. Religious teachings loom in the background, reminding everyone that too much attention to appearance can distract from the soul. Historians still argue how strictly these teachings were followed in daily life, but the anxiety around excess is unmistakable. As you move through these spaces, you realize cosmetics are also seasonal. What you apply in winter differs from summer, adapting to dryness, heat, and available ingredients. Beauty routines shift with the agricultural calendar, which feels both logical and strangely grounding. You're not fighting your environment, you're negotiating with it. You step away from the table, the scent of crushed herbs lingering. Your hands feel dusty, your mind fuller. Beauty, you're learning, is something people actively make, not just something they have. It's crafted from what's nearby, informed by belief and limited by resources. And as gentle and earthy as these mixtures seem, you sense an undercurrent of risk, because not everything people trust to make them beautiful is kind. Some jars ahead gleam faintly, heavier, more ominous. The powders inside promise dramatic results, faster changes, and clearer skin. They also carry consequences no one fully understands yet. You follow that path, curiosity tugging you forward, already suspecting that medieval beauty is about to get a little dangerous. You move closer to those heavier jars, the ones that sit just a bit apart from the others, as if even the shelves are cautious. This is where medieval beauty crosses from herbal experimentation into outright risk-taking. The desire to look refined, pale, and unblemished pushes people towards substances that promise dramatic results, and those promises are taken seriously. Beauty here is not just effort, it's endurance. You peer into a small ceramic container and notice a fine white powder, smoother than chalk, brighter than flour. This is where a mainstream historical fact quietly settles in. Lead-based cosmetics, often called ceruse, were used in medieval Europe to whiten the skin. They created an even, luminous pallor that herbs simply couldn't match. The effect was immediate and striking, which made it irresistible to those who could afford it. No one fully understands the long-term consequences yet. They just know it works. You watch someone apply it carefully, almost reverently, mixing the powder with vinegar or water to create a paste. The skin looks flawless afterward, smooth and reflective in candlelight. Compliments follow, approval settles in, beauty standards reward the result, not the method. Historians still argue whether people suspected these cosmetics were harmful or whether the gradual effects were simply blamed on illness or fate. But either way, usage continues. Mercury makes an appearance too, especially in treatments for skin conditions. It's believed to cleanse, purify, and rebalance the body. Applied in small amounts, often mixed into ointments, it promises clearer skin and fewer blemishes. You try not to think too hard about that. That's joke 1, delivered with a gentle mental shrug. The logic behind these choices isn't foolish. It's consistent with the medical theories of the time. If illness comes from imbalance or corruption, then strong substances must restore order. Beauty and medicine overlap almost completely here. A cream that burns slightly is assumed to be doing something useful. Pain becomes proof of effectiveness. You imagine reading, "Tingling is normal," on a medieval label and almost laugh. That's joke 2, drifting by like smoke. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you recall whispers about arsenic wafers. Small doses ingested to improve complexion. The idea is that poison in controlled amounts can stimulate vitality. It sounds alarming now, but it fits neatly into the broader belief that the body can be trained, challenged, and corrected. Historians still argue how widespread these practices were and whether they were limited to certain regions or classes, but the stories persist for a reason. You notice the quiet trade-offs. Skin may look beautiful today, but over time it becomes irritated, scarred, or strangely discolored. Hair thins, teeth loosen, fatigue sets in. These effects are rarely linked back to cosmetics directly. Instead, they're folded into the general unpredictability of life. Beauty demands sacrifice, and medieval life is already full of that. There's an odd calm to how this risk is accepted. People don't chase youth endlessly, they chase adequacy. Looking right for your station matters more than looking extraordinary. If dangerous substances help you meet that expectation, they're worth considering. You think about modern equivalents and decide not to push that comparison too far. That's joke 3, and it fades quickly. As you step back from the jars, the glow of candlelight softens everything again. These substances don't feel sinister in this context. They feel hopeful. They promise control in a world with very little of it. Beauty becomes one area where effort seems to pay off, even if the cost is hidden. You leave the apothecary space with a deeper understanding of how far people will go to match an ideal. The pursuit isn't reckless, it's deeply human. And as you move on, you sense that not all beauty standards rely on substances at all. Some are achieved by removal rather than addition, reshaping the face itself to match a vision that feels, somehow, even stranger. You continue on, leaving jars and powders behind, and you begin to notice something unsettlingly consistent about the faces around you. Foreheads seem expansive. Eyebrows are faint, sometimes barely there at all. At first you think it's the light, or maybe fatigue, but no, this is deliberate. Welcome to one of the strangest medieval beauty fashions, the intentional removal of hair from the face. You watch a woman seated near a window, carefully plucking at her hairline with a small tool. Each movement is slow and practiced, as if patience itself is part of the ritual. The goal is a high, rounded forehead, considered a major sign of beauty and intelligence. A tall forehead suggests a large brain, which medieval thinkers associate with wisdom and refinement. This isn't just fashion. It's philosophy filtered through aesthetics. A mainstream historical fact quietly anchors itself here in late medieval Europe. Particularly among nobler women, hair was often removed from the forehead and eyebrows to achieve this idealized look. Eyebrows, meanwhile, are treated as optional. Thin brows are preferred, and in many cases, they're removed entirely. A smooth, uninterrupted expanse of skin from hairline to eye creates a calm, almost otherworldly expression. You realize that faces are being edited long before Photoshop ever existed. The difference is that here, the undo button is time. That's joke 1, light and unhurried. The methods vary. Tweezers are common, but so are small razors, pumice stones, and depilatory creams made from ingredients you already don't trust. Some mixtures include quicklime or vinegar, applied carefully and then scraped away. The sensation is not pleasant, but discomfort is expected. Beauty routines are not meant to be enjoyable, they're meant to be effective. Historians still argue whether these practices caused frequent infections or whether people developed techniques to minimize harm, but either way, the look spreads. You start noticing it everywhere now. In paintings, in tapestries, in the way people style themselves in public. High foreheads become shortened for elegance. A low hairline suggests earthiness, closeness to labor, maybe even stubbornness. Beauty standards don't just shape faces, they shape assumptions. You imagine explaining bangs to someone here and decide it's best left unexplored. That's joke 2, drifting gently past. Men aren't entirely excluded from this trend, though it's less extreme. Some pluck stray hairs to clean up their appearance, especially at court. A tidy face suggests self-control, which is deeply attractive in a society obsessed with balance. Wildness is admired in stories, but in real life, moderation wins. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you recall that some women used bandages or tightly wrapped cloths to train the hairline backward over time. It's slow, subtle, and requires dedication. Beauty here isn't about quick fixes, it's about long-term reshaping. You think about how long it must take to grow hair back if you change your mind, and feel a quiet respect for their commitment. Religion once again hums in the background. The face is believed to reflect the soul, and the forehead, in particular, is associated with thought and reason. Making it larger is like visually amplifying your inner virtues. At the same time, overt vanity is frowned upon, so the ideal look must appear natural, as if you were simply born with fewer eyebrows and a perfectly receding hairline. Historians still argue whether people truly believed these traits were innate or whether everyone understood the artifice and politely ignored it. You pause, watching someone smooth their newly exposed forehead with a cloth. The skin there is delicate, often irritated, but it's covered carefully with powder or ointment. Hats, veils, and head coverings frame the face to emphasize the effect. Beauty is collaborative. Hair removal works in tandem with clothing and posture. There's something oddly calming about the uniformity of it. Faces become serene, less expressive by modern standards, but more symbolic. Emotion is softened. Individual quirks are smoothed away. You imagine trying to raise an eyebrow and realizing you no longer have one to raise. That's joke 3, and it fades into a quiet smile. As you move on, the fashion begins to feel less bizarre and more logical within its context. When mirrors are rare and portraits idealized, beauty becomes something you approximate rather than perfectly see. Trends spread through observation and imitation, not selfies. A noble woman adopts the look others follow, and soon it feels timeless. You step farther down the street, the candlelight catching on bare foreheads and smooth brows. The look is unmistakable now, almost soothing in its consistency. You realize that medieval beauty often involves subtraction, removing hair color excess, to reveal a controlled, composed version of the self. Ahead, you notice fabrics and head coverings growing more elaborate, hair disappearing entirely beneath veils and hats. What's hidden, you sense, is just as important as what's revealed. And as you drift toward that realization, you let the image of those high, pale foreheads blur gently into the background, carrying you forward. You continue along, and gradually you realize that hair itself has become something of a rumor. It's everywhere in theory, but rarely on display. What grows naturally from the head is far less important than how it's managed, hidden, or symbolized. In medieval society, hair carries meaning, gendered, moral, and deeply social. And beauty standards dictate not just its style, but its visibility. You notice that women's hair is always covered once they reach adulthood. Veils, wimples, hoods, and caps frame the face and conceal what lies beneath. This isn't merely modesty, it's status. A covered head signals maturity, respectability, and self-control. Loose hair, on the other hand, suggests youth, innocence, or moral looseness, depending on who's looking. A mainstream historical fact settles in hearing in much of medieval Europe. Married women were expected to cover their hair in public, and visible hair could be interpreted as socially inappropriate. Underneath those coverings, however, hair is carefully styled. Braids are common, wrapped around the head or coiled neatly to keep everything smooth and contained. Texture matters less than order. Hair that behaves is beautiful hair. You imagine how long it must take to prepare, especially without modern brushes, and feel a quiet appreciation for the patience involved. Wigs enter the picture too, though not in the theatrical way you might expect. They're used sparingly, often to add volume or conceal thinning rather than create dramatic transformations. Materials range from human hair to horsehair, depending on wealth and access. A quirky tidbit drifts in as you recall that false hair pieces could be sewn directly into head coverings, making the illusion seamless. Medieval clip-ins, essentially. That's joke one, soft and unhurried. Men's hair follows its own rules. Length varies by region and period, but cleanliness and control are key. Beards are symbols of masculinity, wisdom, and authority, especially among older men. A well-kept beard suggests discipline, an unkempt one hints at neglect or excess. Shaving is practiced, but not universally. The choice to wear a beard can signal profession, age, or even political allegiance. Beauty standards for men are quieter, but no less present. You notice barbers at work, part groomer, part surgeon. They trim hair, shape beards, and sometimes perform minor medical procedures. Grooming and health blur together again, reinforcing the idea that appearance reflects internal balance. Historians still argue whether barbers were primarily medical practitioners who happened to cut hair or hair specialists who expanded into medicine. But either way, they're central figures in maintaining beauty norms. Color matters too. Fair hair is often praised in literature, associated with youth and virtue. Dark hair carries its own appeal, linked to seriousness and strength. Red hair occupies an uneasy middle ground, admired in some contexts and mistrusted in others. You sense that these associations are more symbolic than literal, shaped by stories as much as by observation. There's humor in how much effort goes into hiding something everyone has. You imagine someone spending hours braiding hair just to cover it completely and feel a sleepy chuckle rise and fall. That's joke two, gentle and brief. Hair care products exist, though they're simple. Oils, herbal rinses, and infusions meant to strengthen or lighten hair are common. Some people use chamomile to brighten blonde tones or walnut husks to darken hair. The results are subtle, but consistency matters. Beauty here is cumulative, built over time through small, repeated actions. Religion once again sets boundaries. Hair is powerful, even dangerous in its symbolism. It can tempt, distract, or provoke envy. Controlling it becomes a moral act. At the same time, saints are often depicted with distinctive hair, reinforcing the idea that hair reflects inner identity. Historians still argue how much of hair covering was driven by religious doctrine versus social convention, but the two are tightly intertwined. You slow your pace, watching veils flutter slightly in the breeze. What's striking isn't what you see, but what you don't. Hair becomes private, intimate, reserved for specific spaces and people. Beauty standards don't demand display, they demand restraint. As you move on, fabrics begin to draw your attention more than faces. Colors deepen, textures shift, and you realize that if hair is hidden, then clothing must speak louder, and it does. Clearly, immediately, and without apology, you follow that thread forward, letting the soft rustle of cloth guide you into the next layer of medieval beauty. You keep moving, and now it's the clothing that speaks first. Before faces, before posture, before anything else. Fabric rustles softly as people pass, and every sound carries information. In medieval life, clothing is language. Beauty standards are stitched directly into seams, dyes, and cuts, turning the body into a walking announcement of who you are, where you belong, and how carefully you're following the rules. You notice color immediately. Bright hues catch the eye in a world dominated by browns, grays, and muted earth tones. Red stands out most of all. Rich, saturated, impossible to ignore. It signals wealth because the dyes are expensive and difficult to produce. A mainstream historical fact settles comfortably here. Medieval dyeing techniques made vivid colors like crimson and deep blue costly, so wearing them often indicated high status. Beauty, once again, aligns with access. Blue carries its own weight. It's associated with purity and devotion, especially after religious art begins depicting holy figures draped in it. Wearing blue isn't just fashionable, it's morally reassuring. Green suggests youth and vitality, though too much can look gaudy. Black, surprisingly, becomes fashionable among elites later in the medieval period, requiring repeated dyeing to achieve depth. You realize even simple colors are anything but simple. Fabric matters as much as color. Wool is everywhere, practical and warm, but fine wool sets you apart from coarse. Line is prized for its cleanliness and comfort. Silk, when you see it, practically glows, moving differently than anything else. It's imported, rare, and unmistakably elite. You imagine how it must feel to wear something that already announces your importance before you even speak. That's joke one, drifting by like a contented sigh. Cut and fit shape beauty too. Clothing is tailored to create an ideal silhouette, emphasizing long lines and controlled proportions. For women, that often means a high waist and flowing skirt, suggesting fertility and grace without overt display. For men, fitted tunics and struck shoulders convey strength and authority without tipping into brute labor. Clothes don't reveal bodies, they suggest them. Beauty here is about implication. You start noticing sumptuary laws at work, even if no one names them out loud. Certain fabrics, colors, and decorations are legally restricted to specific classes. Wearing something above your station isn't just unfashionable, it's illegal. Historians still argue how strictly these laws were enforced in daily life, but their existence alone shapes beauty standards. Desire is constrained by law, which somehow makes it sharper. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you watch someone adjust a sleeve trimmed with fur. Fur linings are popular, not just for warmth but for status. Even hidden for counts, knowing it's there matters. Squirrel, ermine, fox. Each carries its own implication. You smile faintly at the idea of secret luxury, worn for yourself as much as for others. That's joke too, soft and fleeting. Clean lines shows up again through clothing, crisp folds, minimal stains, careful repairs. all signal respectability. Even patched garments can be beautiful if they're maintained with care. Sloppiness, not poverty, is the real aesthetic failure. You realize medieval beauty has a strong moral streaking. Effort equals virtue. Accessories add punctuation. Belts, brooches, buttons, and laces draw attention to specific parts of the body. A finely worked brooch at the throat frames the face. A belt emphasizes posture and movement. These details are small but deliberate. Beauty lives in the margins here, in things noticed only if you're paying attention. Religious influence hums beneath it all. Modesty shapes cuts and layers. Too much skin is suspicious. Too little expression is dull. The balance is subtle. Historians still argue how individuals navigated personal taste within religious expectation, but most people learn to read the room and the church very well. You slow your pace, letting the rhythm of footsteps and fabric lull you. Clothing doesn't just decorate bodies, it disciplines them. Long skirts change how you walk. Fitted sleeves alter how you gesture. Beauty standards reshape movement itself, turning daily life into a quiet performance. There's something oddly soothing about how clear the rules are. You don't need to guess what's admired. It's spelled out in thread and dye. And yet, within those rules, people find ways to express themselves. A slightly brighter ribbon, a cleaner hem, a better fit. Small rebellions, softly worn. As you pass into another stretch of street, the clothing grows plainer, sturdier. Beauty doesn't disappear, it adapts. Here, strength, endurance, and neatness matter more than color. You realize that ideals shift subtly depending on context, and that no single standard applies to everyone equally. The air cools, footsteps slow, and your attention drifts from fabric to form. Bodies themselves, shaped by work, food, and habit, begin to stand out more clearly. Clothing can suggest an ideal, but it can't fully hide the life lived underneath. You follow that thought forward, letting it carry you gently into the next layer of medieval beauty. You keep walking, and now the illusion softens. Beneath the layers of cloth, dye, and careful tailoring, bodies reveal the quiet truth of medieval life. Beauty standards don't float above reality. They're shaped by it, pressed and molded by work, diet, and exhaustion. Here, the body itself is a record, and everyone knows how to read it. You notice how posture differs from person to person. Those who labor bend slightly forward, shoulders rounded from years of lifting, digging, carrying. Their movements are efficient, practice shaped by necessity. Among the wealthier, posture is straighter, less compressed by repetition. A mainstream historical fact settles in here. Most medieval people performed physically demanding work from a young age, and it left visible marks on their bodies. Marks that directly influenced how attractiveness was perceived. Thinness means something very different here than it does now. Extreme thinness suggests illness or hunger, neither of which is attractive. A certain fullness, especially in women, is admired. Softness implies access to regular food, a stable household, and freedom from constant labor. It's not obesity that's prized, but comfort. Bodies that look sustained rather than strained. You realize medieval beauty standards are less about sculpting and more about signaling security. You watch someone walk by with strong arms and a steady gait. Among peasants, physical capability is its own form of beauty. Strength means survival. Endurance is attractive. These qualities don't always translate upward in class ideals, but within local communities they matter deeply. Beauty isn't universal, it's contextual. Historians still argue how sharply beauty ideals diverged between classes, but it's clear that admiration adapts to daily reality. Diet plays a quiet but constant role. Bread is the backbone of most meals, with grains varying by region and wealth. The quality of that bread shows up on bodies over time. Better nutrition supports healthier skin, thicker hair, stronger teeth. Meat, when available, adds to this impression. A body that looks well fed is visually distinct, and people notice. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you recall that medieval people often judged attractiveness by how well someone withstood hardship. Surviving a harsh winter, a bad harvest, or a long illness added to your reputation, resilience becomes part of beauty. You smile at the idea of still standing as an aesthetic category. That's joke one, light and fleeting. Children grow into these standards almost unconsciously. From a young age, bodies are shaped by chores, responsibilities, and expectations. By adolescence, physical differences between classes are already visible. Beauty ideals don't need to be taught explicitly. They're observed, absorbed, and reinforced daily. You notice scars, now small and large. Some are from accidents, others from illness or work. Scars don't automatically erase attractiveness, especially for men. In some contexts, they suggest experience or toughness. But too many scars, or scars associated with disease, can provoke unease. Beauty standards are nuanced, balancing admiration with fear. Medical beliefs hover in the background again. The four humors, blood flame, black bile, yellow bile, are thought to shape not just health but appearance. A balanced body looks attractive because is attractive. Red cheeks suggest good blood. Clear eyes suggest proper humoral flow. Historians still argue how literally people interpreted these ideas, but they provide a framework for judging bodies without modern science. There's humor in how much meaning is read into small details. A slight limp might be overlooked if someone is otherwise healthy. A hunched back draws quick conclusions. You imagine medieval posture coaches and quietly dismiss the thought. That's joke two, drifting away. Clothing works hard to soften or emphasize these bodily realities, but it can only do so much. A well-fed body fills garments differently. Movement gives things away. Beauty, in the end, is not static. It's kinetic. How you walk, sit, lift, and rest all contribute to how others see you. As the street grows quieter, you sense the weight of all this on the people around you. Beauty standards here are forgiving in some ways and harsh in others. They allow for age, experience, and labor, but they also reward comfort and stability. Looking good often means looking like your life is manageable. You slow your steps, letting this understanding settle. Bodies aren't judged in isolation, they're read as evidence. And in a world without privacy, without anonymity, your body tells your story before you open your mouth. Ahead, you notice faces turning slightly away as people speak, mouths partially hidden. Teeth flash briefly, then disappear. It dawns on you that smiles breath, and mouths themselves carry their own set of quiet judgments. You follow that realization forward, letting the night air cool your thoughts as you drift toward the next layer of medieval beauty. You drift farther into the quieter lanes, and now it's the mouth that claims your attention. Teeth, breath, and the simple act of smiling are subtle yet powerful markers of beauty. In a world without modern dentistry, what you reveal when you speak, or don't speak, carries meaning. A clean, straight smile suggests careful habits, access to resources, and, by extension, social standing. A crooked or missing tooth hints at labor, diet, or the unpredictability of life itself. This is a mainstream historical fact. Oral health in the Middle Ages was closely linked to both social class and perceptions of beauty. You notice that toothpaste as we know it doesn't exist, but people still clean their teeth in various ways. Cloths rubbed with salt, herbal powders, or chalk help remove visible grime. Misalignment is rarely corrected, but decay is disguised when possible. Small brushes made from soft twigs are common. Even chewing aromatic herbs, like mint or rue, serves dual purposes, freshening breath and signaling refinement. Historians still argue whether these techniques were truly effective or mostly symbolic, but intention counts for a lot in this society. Breath, surprisingly, is a bigger factor than you might expect. Garlic, onions, and livelihoods, and strong, smelling foods are carefully timed or avoided when social interaction matters. Perfume isn't just for skin or clothing, it can mask what the mouth reveals. Commanders, cloves, and rosewater, scented handkerchiefs double as breath fresheners in some contexts. A quirky tidbit drifts big, some wealthy people keep small. perfumed sponges in their mouths at gatherings to soften odors, a kind of medieval dental chew. That's joke one, lightly amused, fading in the background. Smiles themselves are measured. Wide, open grins are rare in portraits, modest expressions dominate. Too broad a smile risks being seen as frivolous or immodest. Subtlety communicates both restraint and civility, a recurring theme in medieval aesthetics. Even showing teeth can be a delicate negotiation between approachability and propriety. You notice stains, tea, wine, or simply years of diet. Pale teeth are admired but rarely natural. Tooth cleaning regimens focus more on appearance than health, which makes sense in a world where decay is inevitable and treatments are limited. Sometimes, charcoal is applied to darken teeth deliberately, creating contrast with pale skin. Historians still argue whether this practice was common or merely anecdotal, but the stories persist, which tells you something about perception versus reality. Dental deformities and missing teeth are also interpreted socially. Children often lose teeth earlier due to nutrition, and adults frequently suffer from worn enamel or abscesses. Missing teeth in older individuals can be overlooked. Age itself carries grace, but in younger adults, it may carry subtle social consequences. This intersection of health, beauty, and age is nuanced, far more than modern stereotypes allow. A quirky ritual surfaces in your mind. Some individuals would rub certain herbs on gums to maintain firmness, or even bite gently on small sticks infused with aromatic substances to stimulate circulation. Results vary, but the act itself signals diligence and care. That's joke 2, delivered softly, a historical wink. Smell remains closely tied to mouth care. Breath can betray diet, hygiene, or even disease. In gatherings, discreet avoidance of full odors is considered both polite and attractive. Perfume, again, is your ally, applied to clothing, hands, or gloves in a delicate balancing act. Beauty, in this case, is almost entirely relational. It exists in interaction, not isolation. Children and adolescents are observed quietly for dental cues, too. Early loss, visible staining, or misalignment shapes how peers and potential partners perceive them. Beauty standards are cumulative. What you learn in youth becomes part of adult social calculus. Historians still debate how much peer observation influenced long-term grooming and behavior, but the evidence of attention is clear. You notice conversation itself is moderated. Mouths move carefully, words are chosen thoughtfully. Displaying teeth or speaking too loudly risks revealing more than just pronunciation. It exposes lifestyle, habits, and class. You realize beauty is more than appearance. It's controlled presentation, subtly orchestrated at every level. As you step past this lane, the faint scent of rose and sage lingers, blending with the awareness of teeth, breath, and the invisible judgment of others. You take a quiet breath yourself, appreciating the delicate balance medieval people maintain. Beauty is not just what you see, it's what you don't, what you control, and what you allow others to glimpse. Ahead, the air thickens slightly with incense and herbs. You sense that scents will soon dominate the landscape, masking realities while signaling refinement. You follow that scented thread forward, drifting toward the next layer of medieval aesthetics. You step into a slightly wider courtyard, and now the air itself seems intentional, thick with layers of scent. Perfume, incense, and aromatic herbs dominate the atmosphere, creating a haze that softens reality and highlights beauty. Here, scent is more than decoration. It's survival, social signaling, and sometimes spiritual protection all rolled into one. You inhale slowly and notice how carefully people layer fragrances, balancing the natural smell of skin, clothes, and the surrounding environment. A mainstream historical fact emerges. Medieval Europeans often believed that bad odors carried disease, and scented substances were used to counteract these invisible threats. Pomanders, small, perforated balls filled with aromatic substances, swing gently from belts or hands, releasing delicate fragrances as people move. Cloves, ambergris, musk, and powdered herbs mingle to create a personalized aura. Even children sometimes carry tiny pouches of herbs, taught early that scent can indicate care, class, or caution. Historians still argue how widespread pomander use actually was, but their presence in inventories, wills, and literature is unmistakable. They are both practical and symbolic. Incense fills religious spaces, and you notice that its use extends beyond the church. Burning frankincense, myrrh, or juniper in private homes is common, intended to purify the air or calm the spirit. A quirky Tibet surfer says, some people keep incense burning during meals to mask the smell of preserved meats or unwashed bodies. That's joke one, floating gently on the warm air. Medieval hygiene meets aromatic improvisation, and somehow it works. Perfumes also become gendered signals. Women wear scented oils or pomanders to accentuate their social presence, while men often dab lighter fragrances on gloves, hats, or beards. The idea isn't seduction in the modern sense. It's reassurance. A pleasing scent communicates cleanliness, refinement, and awareness of social norms. In some cases, strong fragrances are worn to cover flaws in both appearance and environment, creating an invisible mask that is as meaningful as clothing or skin tone. You notice that layering is deliberate. People combine powders, oils, and aromatic herbs with scented gloves or sleeves. Smells mingle and change as they move through streets, marketplaces, and halls. The effect is subtle, but everyone knows how to read it. Historians still debate whether the layering of scents was primarily aesthetic, practical, or moral, but the lines between these categories blur in practice. You pass a small wooden stall where a merchant sells scented sachets and herbal pouches. Each one is tailored for a different purpose, some to attract attention, others to hide odors, some for supposed protection against disease. The variety is dizzying, and you imagine trying to memorize it all. That's joke two, quietly chuckling in your head. Children participate too, though more simply. They carry small pouches of lavender or rosemary, learning early that smell affects perception. Education in aroma begins before literacy, a kind of olfactory apprenticeship. Beauty is taught, subtly reinforced and sensed. You notice the paradox here: egg smell both reveals and conceals. A faint herbal scent indicates care and status, but it can also hide the realities of labor, diet, or illness. In a society without modern sanitation, this invisible layer of refinement becomes an essential part of being judged attractive. Perfume softens the harsh edges of reality while highlighting the parts of life that society wishes to see. Medical theory drifts in once more. Humoral balance is said to influence odor. Someone, hot or cold, may smell differently, and scented substances are used to restore equilibrium. History debates whether people believed this literally or simply adopted it as conventional wisdom, but either way, fragrance carries moral, aesthetic, and health-related weight. You pause to inhale again, letting the mingled scents wash over you. Each aroma tells a story of care, effort, and environment. Beauty in this context is not passive, it is actively performed, sensed, and interpreted. You move forward slowly, letting the fragrant haze guide you toward the next stage, where social class and aspiration begin to clash with the ideals of beauty you've already observed. You drift onward, following the scent trails, and suddenly, class becomes unavoidable. Beauty isn't just personal or aesthetic. It's woven directly into the fabric of society. You notice how nobles glide past, their clothing immaculate, their powdered faces bright, their hair styled or concealed perfectly. Peasants, by contrast, move with practicality, their appearances shaped by work, not aspiration. This is a mainstream historical fact. Medieval beauty ideals were heavily class-dependent, and the markers of attractiveness differed dramatically between social strata. You see the contrasts clearly now. Noblewomen display finely woven fabrics, delicate jewelry, and subtly applied cosmetics, signaling refinement and wealth. Peasant women maintain cleanliness where possible, simple clothing, and practical hairstyles. Their beauty exists in endurance and careful maintenance, not in luxury or artifice. Historians still argue how much peasant aesthetics were influenced by the upper classes versus local cultural practices. but the tension between aspiration and reality is evident everywhere. You notice subtle mimicry. Some peasants adopt elements of noble fashion, small colored trims, brighter ribbons, carefully washed under layers. Even if materials are cheaper, the visual effect is deliberate. The pursuit of beauty crosses social boundaries, but always with limits. You smile faintly at the idea of medieval fast fashion, centuries before fast fashion was even conceivable. That's joke what quietly filed away. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some nobles prefer understated displays precisely because over-the-top adornment could draw suspicion or suggest vanity. In this world, moderation is often more admired than extravagance. Less can be more, and the right subtle gesture, a hidden gem, a carefully perfumed sleeve, a well-placed fold of fabric, communicates refinement without shouting it. Beauty here is coded, nuanced, and intensely performative. Men experience classed beauty too. A nobleman's hands, posture, and cleanliness are scrutinized alongside his clothing. Peasant men are judged on strength and capability, which, while respected, doesn't carry the same social cachet. Grooming, subtle cosmetics, and controlled hair signal status in ways that are visible even without words. Historians still argue how rigid these distinctions were across regions, but they influence perception consistently. You pass a market where goods from distant lands appear briefly, silk from Italy, spices from the Levant, and brightly colored fabrics that are rare locally. Carrying these materials or wearing them, even sparingly, signals aspiration and wealth. Small details, a trim here, a belt there, become a silent conversation about position and taste. You imagine negotiating your own place in this visual economy and shiver slightly at how high the stakes feel. Children participate in this social reading too. Observing how adults dress and adorn themselves teaches them early how class shapes beauty. Play involves imitation, from tying small scarves like their mothers to braiding hair like older sisters. You realize that by adolescence, most people are already fluent in the language of status, inflected aesthetics. You notice humor hidden in the strictures of class. A noble may spend hours preparing to walk past peasants who barely notice, and a peasant may carefully mimic elite styles, only to be laughed at by those in their own circle. That's joke too, floating softly on the warm afternoon air. Religion threads quietly through classed beauty. Modesty, restraint, and decorum are intertwined with wealth. A well-dressed noble is admired, but excessive vanity can be condemned as sinful. A poor person showing off too much might appear foolish or morally suspect. Historians still debate how literal these religious prescriptions were in everyday life, but the tension shapes appearances nonetheless. You pause to watch someone adjust a veil over a powdered face, careful not to reveal too much. Beauty standards, you realize, are less about individual desire than about social literacy. The ability to read others, signal yourself correctly, and interpret subtle cues. Everyone participates, whether they have wealth or not, and everyone navigates boundaries, aspiration, and reality simultaneously. As you drift forward, the marketplace quiets, leaving only the soft rustle of clothing, the distant sounds of labor, and the lingering scents of herbs and incense. You understand that medieval beauty is never isolated. It exists within social networks, aspiration, and observation. Your attention softens as you prepare to move into the private sphere of marriage, courtship, and first glances, where beauty begins to take on even more practical weight. You step lightly into the realm of first impressions, where beauty is no longer abstract but transactional. Marriage markets hum quietly in the background of daily life, and everyone understands that looks carry weight beyond mere admiration. The way a young woman or man appears can influence lifelong arrangements, social alliances, and economic security. A mainstream historical fact in many parts of medieval Europe, appearance, including cleanliness, clothing, and visible health, was a crucial factor in marriage negotiations and dowry discussions. You watch a noblewoman adjust her veil, as a prospective suitor approaches. Eyes flicker over details, face, hands, posture, the hint of skill or refinement in movement. Beauty is read like a ledger. Each small sign represents potential value. Teeth, skin, and hair convey health and capacity to bear children. Hands reveal care or labor. Even subtle gestures, how she lifts her sleeve, how lightly she touches fabric, signal breeding and training. Historians still argue how much of this assessment was conscious strategy versus social habit, but its influence is undeniable. Peasant marriages are subtler, yet no less guided by appearance. Clean clothing, proper posture, and a sturdy physique suggest capability and reliability. Beauty here is functional, survival and fitness expressed visually. A quirky tidbit drifts through your mind and livelihoods. Some families intentionally exaggerate minor flaws in children to avoid overvaluation in the marriage market, keeping expectations realistic. That's joke one, quietly curled in the corners of your awareness. Stories themselves carry visual weight. Jewelry, fabric, and small possessions are displayed carefully, signaling both the family's means and the prospective spouse's desirability. Beauty isn't purely bodily. It extends into possessions and presentation. The family collectively invests in the display, turning the entire household into a living portfolio. Historians still debate how much negotiation focused on appearance versus lineage or wealth, but visual impression plays a consistent role. You notice ritualized glances. Courtiers, neighbors, and kin all watch discreetly, offering silent approval or critique. A suitor's attention may linger, signaling interest. Modesty is key. Too much display risks shame. Too little invites suspicion. Beauty is socially calibrated. Its performance and restraint in equal measure. Joke two surfaces softly, imagining someone practicing the perfect polite glance for hours and failing anyway, a timeless frustration. Perfume, again, plays a role. A scented glove, a subtle dab of rose water on a handkerchief. Even the soft fragrance of hair hints at refinement. The senses beyond sight. Smell, sound, movement, join to create a composite judgment. Beauty here is multi-sensory and strategic, not spontaneous. The faint aroma of rosemary or lavender can tip perception in your favor, adding invisible polish to visible effort. Youth is highly prized, particularly in women, though men benefit from vitality as well. Facial symmetry, smooth skin, and bright eyes are noticed immediately, sometimes before any conversation begins. Age and experience can soften the ideal, but early marriage and reproductive potential dominate visual assessments. Historians still argue whether this focus was universal or varied regionally, but evidence in literature, art, and legal records supports it strongly. You notice subtle hierarchies within glances. Kin may approve a prospective partner for one reason, neighbors for another. Everyone interprets beauty according to their lens, weaving together social expectations with personal taste. You quietly admire the complexity of this network. Everyone participates, consciously or not, in negotiating value through visual cues. A final quirky observation surfaces. Some families send daughters to live with wealthier relatives for months before marriage, giving them time to learn comportment, grooming, and the arts of subtle self-presentation. Beauty is taught, rehearsed, and polished before it ever meets potential suitors. That's joke 3, gently suspended in your mind like a feather. As you move past this courtyard of glances, veils, and whispered judgments, you sense that beauty here is not private. It exists as a currency, an argument, and a social performance, bound up with morality, aspiration, and practicality. You feel it settle quietly in the air, a gentle reminder that attraction is never just aesthetic. It's functional, communal, and surprisingly strategic. Ahead, the sounds of the town fade, replaced by the hush of religious spaces, reminding you that beauty and morality often share the same stage. You follow that thought softly, preparing to see how spiritual expectations shape what is admired, restrained, or condemned. You enter a quieter, shadowed corner of the town, where the bells of a small chapel are faintly against stone walls. Here, beauty begins to mingle seamlessly with spirituality. In medieval thought, physical appearance is not just a personal or social concern. It reflects the soul. A mainstream historical fact anchors itself gently in religious teachings and art. Beauty is often equated with virtue, and deformity or neglect can be interpreted as moral or spiritual deficiency. You notice the subtle ways this belief shapes daily life. People move with measured grace, hands folded or held lightly, posture straight yet relaxed. Even small gestures are imbued with significance. Smooth, clean skin is not vanity, it's an outward sign of inner order. Hair, previously a private and sometimes mischievous canvas, is now restrained to signal modesty and obedience. The body becomes a living sermon. Historians still argue whether laypeople consciously thought this way or merely absorbed these ideals passively, but the imagery is constant. Incense curls upward in streams, softening shadows and infusing the air with calm. Scent, previously a practical and social tool, now takes on moral weight. A faint trace of frankincense or rose signals refinement, respect, and devotion. Even gloves or small perfumed pouches hint at virtue in addition to cleanliness. A quirky tidbit drifts through your mind. Some women carry tiny relics inside scented pouches pressed to their clothing, blending devotion, fashion, and fragrance into one carefully balanced gesture. "That's joke one," whispered with gentle amusement. You notice modesty dictating fashion here even more rigidly. Necklines, sleeves, and skirts are longer, veils drawn tight. Clothing is layered not just for status, but to guard the body as a sacred vessel. Revealing skin or hair is potentially dangerous, morally speaking. Beauty in this context is most admired when it's disciplined, subtle, and aligned with spiritual ideals. Eyes play a significant role. Bright, clear eyes suggest a soul in balance. Gazes are controlled, direct without aggression, attentive without impropriety. You notice that smiling is measured, wide, carefree grins are rare. Emotion is moderated to reflect virtue rather than individual whim. Historians still argue how much these behavioral ideals shaped social expectations versus religious instruction, but both influence perception. You observe ritual washing, now framed as both hygienic and spiritual. Hands are rinsed before prayers, faces refreshed with scented water. The act of cleansing is intertwined with piety, reinforcing the notion that beauty and morality are inseparable. Even makeup, previously a social tool, is sometimes justified through this lens. Say a pale face, gentle rouge, or soft powder is acceptable if it aligns with modesty and does not suggest vanity. A gentle humor surfaces as you imagine someone practicing the holy glow looks slightly pale, carefully powdered, faintly scented, but entirely serene. That's joke two, subtle, almost imperceptible. Beauty in religious contexts is almost theatrical, yet performed quietly and internally rather than for applause. Children learn early, guided by nuns, family, and community, that appearance reflects virtue. Small gestures, hair neatly braided, hands clean, eyes attentive, are reinforced constantly. Over time, these lessons create a cultural rhythm where beauty and morality move in tandem, shaping posture, scent, movement, and expression simultaneously. Perfumed gloves, powdered faces, and veiled hair are now not just tools of class or attraction, but instruments of spiritual literacy. Historians still argue whether medieval people consciously equated beauty with holiness, or if it emerged organically through layered social cues, but the effect is unmistakable. You pause, breathing in incense and soft candlelight, letting the weight of these intertwined expectations settle around you. Here, beauty is quiet, reflective, and disciplined, a gentle echo of virtue projected into the visible world. Ahead, you sense that the next stage will reveal how these ideals intersect with the physical realities of age, health, and survival, testing how flexible or unforgiving medieval beauty can truly be. You drift farther into the quiet corridors of medieval life, and now age begins to make itself visible. Beauty is no longer just about polish, fragrance, or adornment. It's entwined with the passage of time. You notice that the smooth, pale faces of youth gradually give way to lines, spots, and sagging skin, In medieval society, this isn't merely cosmetic, it's deeply social. A mainstream historical fact anchors itself here in youthful appearance, particularly in women, is closely tied to perceived fertility and social value, while aging often shifts how beauty is read and rewarded. You watch older women adjusting veils or carefully clothing to disguise what time has rendered visible. They may no longer have high foreheads untouched by labor or smooth cheeks softened by gentle rouge, but their presentation still communicates refinement. Beauty standards evolve with age. In men, grey hair or slight wrinkles can suggest wisdom and experience, qualities admired and respected. Historians still argue how much physical aging affected marital prospects versus social authority, but clearly, age adds a layer of complexity. You notice the quiet strategies employed to maintain appearance. Powdered faces conceal liver spots or sun damage. Subtle rouges add warmth to cheeks that are losing it naturally, and carefully arranged hair disguises thinning. Even posture is adjusted. Shoulders are squared, backs held straighter to convey vitality, a quirky tippet surface. Some women use small, lifting bands under their garments or tied subtly under the chin to give the illusion of firmness to the jaw or neck. A little secret device of medieval engineering. That's joke one, drifting like a soft breeze. Diet continues to play a role. Consuming rich foods and maintaining hydration helps preserve skin elasticity and overall vitality. Herbs, oils, and ointments provide some support, though effects are subtle and inconsistent. Health and beauty are tightly linked, and illness leaves visible traces. Pale skin, once a marker of refinement, can now suggest weakness if combined with other symptoms. Historians still debate how much people interpreted these signals consciously versus intuitively, but they certainly influence social perception. The passing of teeth and gums comes into play as well. You notice older faces with missing or worn teeth, softened smiles, or carefully concealed gaps. These features are read differently depending on gender, social standing, and context. Youthful teeth remain a marker of vitality, but experience carries its own beauty in storytelling, wisdom, and decorum. A subtle humor arises as you imagine someone meticulously maintaining the illusion of youth while secretly favoring comfort over constant grooming. That's joke 2, lingering lightly. Aging isn't resisted entirely, it's negotiated. People use clothing, cosmetics, posture, and fragrance to adapt ideals to the body they inhabit. Health, too, intertwines with beauty in practical ways. Chronic illnesses, fatigue, or malnutrition alter appearance, often subtly but significantly. Robustness signals survival, while frailty invites concern. Beauty isn't just about desire, it's about assurance. An older woman who maintains composure, clean skin, and pleasant scent demonstrates mastery over circumstance, which carries its own form of attractiveness. Perfume continues to mediate social perception. Subtle application can soften lines, disguise fatigue, and convey control. Fragrance blends with gesture, posture, and expression to maintain social grace despite the inevitable changes of age. Historians still debate how consciously these choices were made versus culturally absorbed, but the patterns are clear. You notice that the older generation mentors younger individuals in these arts, passing down secrets of concealment, poise, and fragrance. Beauty becomes an intergenerational conversation, not just a personal endeavor. A wrinkle, a spot, or a strand of gray hair may fade into insignificance when supported by accumulated wisdom and social skill. As you step onward, the courtyard grows quieter, shadows lengthen, and you feel the rhythm of centuries pressing gently into awareness. Beauty in medieval times is not frozen, it adapts, negotiates, and survives alongside aging, revealing a complex dance between body, society, and aspiration. Ahead, you sense that the next layer will explore how illness, diet, and unconventional remedies continue to shape these ideals in surprising and sometimes alarming ways. You move further into the dimly lit streets, and now the marks of life itself begin to reveal the subtler truths of medieval beauty. Scars, blemishes, and other traces of lived experience speak volumes. Unlike the polished, powdered faces of youth or the carefully constructed veneers of status, these signs are reminders of labor, illness, or accident. A mainstream historical fact asserts itself. People in the Middle Ages were constantly negotiating how visible injuries, pockmarks, or skin blemishes affected their social and aesthetic standing. You notice a man limping slightly, his forearms thick with muscle from years of work. The scar along his wrist is faint but noticeable. Among laborers, these signs are not necessarily detracting. They signal resilience, competence, and survival. In noble circles, however, even minor imperfections can raise eyebrows as symmetry, smoothness, and flawlessness are prized. Historians still argue how much scars were socially stigmatized versus subtly admired depending on context. But everyone notices them. You catch a glimpse of pockmarked skin on a young woman, partly concealed by careful powdering. Some blemishes are considered unfortunate but understandable. Others, if prominent, can affect perceived marriageability. Quirky tidbit: there's anecdotal evidence of small charms or herbal concoctions applied to minimize scarring, often with ingredients like egg white or crushed herbs, though effectiveness was dubious at best. That's joke one, floating gently like a sigh. You notice the psychological impact as well. People learn to present themselves strategically, tilting their faces to shadow scars, arranging hair or clothing to mask imperfections, and directing attention toward their strengths. Beauty here is adaptive. The standards themselves recognize the realities of living in a world with limited medical knowledge, frequent injury, and unpredictable health. Illness leaves subtler marks too. Malnutrition or fevers can alter skin tone, hair texture, or body shape. A thin, drawn face might be interpreted as delicate in one context, weak in another. You notice that the interpretation often depends on social expectations, occupation, and status. Historians still debate the degree to which illness dictated beauty perception versus cultural aspiration, but the connection is undeniable. You pause to observe a small ritual. Someone gently massages herbal ointment into scar tissue. The act is as much about hope and care as appearance. Touch, fragrance, and intent converge to produce a visual and sensory effect that reassures both the wearer and observers. Joke 2 drifts softly, imagining people rubbing mysterious pastes into every imperfection, hoping it works, sometimes secretly thinking it's witchcraft. Birthmarks and natural marks are read differently. Some are considered lucky, some unattractive, and others neutral. Their social meaning shifts according to superstition, local custom, and personal interpretation. Even minor variations in skin, once overlooked, can carry symbolic weight. You notice subtle beauty strategies emerge around scarce clothing, strategically placed to cover or frame, hair arranged to divert attention, gloves or sleeves emphasizing smooth hands. All of these cues speak not to vanity alone but to survival in a socially judgmental environment. Beauty is practical, negotiable, and deeply intertwined with lived experience. Perfume once again plays a quiet role. A well-chosen scent can soften perceptions, mask residual odors, or draw focus to desirable qualities. You inhale faint traces of rose and lavender as you walk, sensing how layered sensory input shapes impression without words. Historians still debate whether people consciously used fragrance to compensate for visible flaws, or if the practice evolved organically. But either way, it's pervasive. You realize that in medieval society, beauty is not absolute. It's a negotiation between ideal and reality. Scars, blemishes, and marks of labor are part of the conversation, shaping what's admired, tolerated, or hidden. As you move forward, the murmur of old streets reminds you that human bodies carry their stories in plain sight. And beauty here is as much about storytelling as it is about appearance. Ahead, you sense the presence of texts, manuals, and advice books, guides that attempt to codify beauty, health, and propriety. You drift toward those written words, curious to see how they instruct, exaggerate, or mislead the eager reader. You enter a quieter room, lined with manuscripts and the faint scent of parchment, where the wisdom of past generations hangs on every shelf. Here, medieval beauty is not just observed, it's written down, codified, and occasionally exaggerated. Manuals and advice books offer instructions for achieving ideal skin, hair, and posture, blending practical guidance with superstition and cultural norms. A mainstream historical fact, medieval beauty treatises, often aimed at women of higher status, circulated widely and contained detailed regimens for washing, perfuming, and adorning oneself. You pick up a slim, leather-bound volume, and as you leaf through it, you notice instructions for pale skin. Gentle washes with milk, oatmeal, or herbs promise a smooth, radiant complexion. Subtle hints recommend avoiding the sun, reinforcing the long-standing preference for paleness as a marker of privilege. Historians still argue how widely these texts were followed versus simply admired, but their influence on aesthetic ideals is undeniable. Quirky tidbits appear frequently in these pages. One recipe suggests a paste of crushed pearls to smooth skin. Another proposes bathing in wine to restore color and vitality. You can't help but smile at the extravagance or the questionable practicality. That's joke one, drifting lightly among the inked lines. The instructions blend serious guidance with performative luxury, making beauty both a practice and a display of wealth. Hair receives as much attention as skin. Manuals describe careful braiding, washing with herbal infusions, and the subtle art of hiding grey or thin strands. Veiling techniques are prescribed to frame the face correctly, while hair removal is advised to maintain the high forehead ideal. You note that these instructions combine social, aesthetic, and moral concerns. Beauty is disciplined, visible, and morally legible. Historians still argue whether these texts reflect common practice or aspirational ideals of the elite, but they shape perception regardless. Perfume and scent are described as almost essential. Rosewater, ambergris, and clove-infused oils are recommended not just for smell, but for supposed health benefits such as warding off disease or harmonizing the humors. Instructions range from delicate, applied sparingly, to extravagant, meant to impress guests and potential suitors. You notice a pattern fragrance, like clothing or posture, is a silent language of refinement. Children are not exempt. Some manuals include advice for grooming young girls, teaching them to braid hair, wash gently, and cultivate manners that enhance their presentation. These early lessons instill lifelong habits, subtly encoding beauty standards long before they reach adulthood. You realize that aesthetics here are cumulative, absorbed over years of observation, instruction, and practice. The manuals are not purely functional. They are moral guides as well. Excessive decoration is discouraged, especially if it signals vanity or distracts from spiritual duties. Modesty, restraint, and harmony are woven into every tip. You notice a recurring admonition: beauty must appear effortless, or it risks moral censure. Joke 2 surfaces faintly, imagining someone carefully over-powdered and then scolded for showing off, a timeless medieval paradox. Some of the recipes are dangerous. Lead powders, mercury ointments, and arsenic-based concoctions appear again. Now written in formal instruction, effectiveness is promised, risk is understated. Beauty, these texts suggest, sometimes requires courage, or at least calculated ignorance. Historians still argue how many people actually followed these instructions versus relying on anecdote or oral knowledge. But their presence indicates a cultural obsession with control over appearance. You notice subtle humor in the repetition. Every manual emphasizes patience, diligence, and observant behavior, yet they all promise rapid transformation. That tension between slow practice and immediate reward is deeply human, echoing modern frustrations in beauty routines. That's joke 3, quietly suspended in the candlelight. As you close the manuscript and look around the room, you realize medieval beauty literature is both prescriptive and performative. It instructs, entertains, and reinforces social norms, blending sensory, moral, and aesthetic concerns. Ahead, The lessons embedded in childhood and adulthood converge as you notice the subtle shaping of youth, preparing them for both social expectation and personal aspiration. You drift back into the streets, carrying the lessons of manuscripts and manuals like invisible weight on your shoulders. Now, the focus shifts to youth itself, not just age, but the cultivated behaviors, gestures, and subtleties that define early life in the context of beauty. In medieval times, children are socialized to internalize aesthetic ideals almost from birth. A mainstream historical fact, childhood grooming, posture, and minor adornments were carefully observed, especially in higher status families, as preparation for adult appearance and social performance. You notice young girls practicing gentle gestures under the watchful eyes of mothers or nurses. Hands are held delicately, fingers rarely splay in public. They braid hair, sometimes for hours, learning precision, symmetry, and patience. Boys too are trained in posture, clean appearance, and subtle gestures of refinement, though physical strength and endurance are emphasized alongside aesthetic polish. Historians still argue whether these lessons were widespread or primarily restricted to elites, but the visual and behavioral effects are striking. Subtle clothing adjustments begin early. Children wear layers, carefully folded hymns, and simple embroidery that teaches coordination between body and garment. Even shoes are selected for both function and elegance. The overall goal is seamlessness. Children learn to move gracefully, appear attentive, and signal virtue without ostentation. A quirky tidbit drifts big. Some young girls carry tiny scented sachets in their pockets or hymns, an early exercise in controlling personal aroma as a social signal. That's joke one, floating faintly in your mind. Education intertwines with grooming. Proper reading posture, quiet hand movements, and polite gestures are as much about presenting the self aesthetically as they are about learning letters or numbers. Medieval beauty is as much performance it is appearance. Children are taught to internalize rhythm, proportion, and subtlety, reinforcing that what is observed externally must reflect inner discipline. Play incorporates imitation. Dolls, small mirrors, and familial observation provide opportunities to rehearse gestures, hairstyles, and minor makeup application. In wealthier households, young girls may mimic adult beauty routines with miniature combs, powders, or hairpins. You imagine the patience required and let a faint chuckle escape. You picture tiny hands trying to braid themselves neatly for hours. That's joke two, soft and gentle. Youth also encounters humor and irony in these lessons. A small misbraid or smudged powder might elicit quieter or polite correction. The balance between effort and outcome is a lifelong lesson. Perfection is idealized, but process matters more. Historians still debate how seriously mistakes were judged versus treated as part of learning, but they shape expectations for adulthood. Physical changes are subtly monitored. Growth, posture, and early signs of secondary sexual characteristics influence grooming and instruction. For girls, pale skin and controlled hair continue to be emphasized. For boys, strength, cleanliness, and developing features are highlighted. Beauty is cumulative. What children learn in gestures, posture, and grooming becomes foundation for adult social and aesthetic standing. Perfume and scent education starts here as well. Children are taught to recognize subtle aromas, apply them sparingly, and avoid overwhelming others. Small sachets, gloves, and lines carry lessons in discretion and subtlety. Smell becomes a measured social tool long before adulthood. Entwined with decorum and etiquette, you step lightly forward, noticing how these early lessons ripple outward. Beauty in youth is not simply cosmetic. It is behavioral, social, and performative, designed to integrate the individual into a broader cultural rhythm. Ahead, the path leads toward adolescence, when these lessons converge with courtship, personal choice, and the subtle negotiation of desire, testing everything learned in childhood and early socialization. You move forward, leaving childhood behind and stepping into the awkward, charged terrain of adolescence. Here, beauty takes on urgency. Bodies are changing, gestures are scrutinized, and social perception begins to carry weight in ways both subtle and immediate. A mainstream historical facting, puberty and the onset of reproductive maturity in medieval society amplified attention to physical appearance, grooming, and comportment, especially for those approaching marriageable age. You notice girls adjusting skirts and veils with newfound awareness, aware that even the smallest movement can signal readiness or decorum. Hands tremble slightly, a brush of hair is re-examined, a posture consciously corrected. Boys, meanwhile, begin to notice how muscle definition, stance, and grooming influence perception. Strength, agility, and cleanliness are social signals now, not merely practical traits. Historians still argue how adolescents themselves internalized beauty standards versus being guided entirely by adults. But the pressure is clear. Clothing evolves with age. Garments are tailored to flatter developing bodies, highlight modestly, and allow freedom of movement. Girls experiment with small decorations, ribbons, and embroidery, often within boundaries set by family or community. Boys adopt fitted tunics or belts to emphasize posture and capability. Subtlety is crucial. Too much display risks criticism. Too little invites invisibility. A quirky tidbit: some young women carry hidden charms or perfumed pouches meant to attract attention discreetly, blending superstition and social signaling. That's joke one, gently floating in your mind. Physical changes prompt renewed attention to skincare and hair. Ointments, washes, and powders are used to maintain a pale, smooth complexion despite the rigors of work or household chores. Hair is styled, plucked, or veiled, reflecting both social expectation and personal care. Adolescents practice these routines diligently, knowing that missteps can affect social standing, courtship, and self-perception. Perfume becomes strategic. Light, layered scents signal refinement and attract attention without overwhelming others. Adolescents learn to walk a delicate line, coordinating smell with gesture, clothing, and social behavior. Historians still debate whether this use of fragrance was conscious seduction, ritualized propriety, or simply cultural habit, but the effect is pervasive. You notice that peer observation amplifies all these behaviors. Adolescents monitor each other constantly, silently judging posture, hair, skin, and scent. Approval is subtle. A glance, a compliment, or polite mimicry, yet it carries weight. Beauty is communal as much as personal. Joke 2 appears softly, imagining a teenager nervously arranging a braid in front of a friend while trying not to look desperate, a timeless performance. Social rituals accelerate at this stage. Festivals, dances, and religious gatherings become stages for display, where gestures, movement, and scent are read alongside clothing and facial appearance. Adolescents learn quickly how to navigate admiration and restraint, attraction and propriety. Beauty is performative, relational, and morally coded. Diet continues to influence appearance. Access to protein, grains, and fats subtly shapes body shape, skin quality, and energy. Illness, fatigue, or deprivation is visually apparent, affecting social and aesthetic evaluation. Adolescents internalize the link between consumption, vitality, and perceived attractiveness. You notice the convergence of education, grooming, and socialization here. Everything learned in childhood, the gestures, posture, etiquette, scent, and subtle adornments, intersects with new desires, bodily changes, and social scrutiny. Adolescence becomes a period of intense negotiation between self-perception and societal expectation. As you drift forward, the streets soften into quiet pathways, preparing you for the next phase: courtship, intimacy, and the subtle arts of attraction in the adult world, where all previous lessons are tested, refined, and sometimes subverted. You step gently into the delicate realm of courtship, where beauty becomes a language, a negotiation, and a game. Adolescence has prepared individuals for this stage, but nothing truly trains you for the subtlety required when attraction is observed, measured, and sometimes manipulated. A mainstream historical fact emerges in medieval Europe. Courtship rituals were highly codified, with gestures, glances, gifts, and subtle displays, all contributing to the perception of desirability. You notice how movement matters more than ever. A turn of the head, a careful adjustment of a sleeve, or the tilt of a chin conveys awareness, modesty, or invitation. Hands are held delicately, fingers barely grazing fabric, while eyes communicate attention without impropriety. Historians still argue how much of courtship was orchestrated by strict social rules versus instinctual attraction. But the choreography is unmistakable. Perfume plays a strategic role. A delicate hint of rose or lavender on a sleeve, hair, or handkerchief signals refinement and care. Fragrance is layered deliberately, revealing effort and subtlety without announcing it loudly. You imagine a young woman carrying a perfumed pouch discreetly, offering a whisper of scent when her hand brushes yours. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some suitors would sniff gloves or handkerchiefs given by a potential partner as a way of testing their suitability. An intimate, olfactory form of appraisal. That's joke one, drifting lightly. Clothing remains a crucial signal. Skirts, tunics, and veils are adjusted to convey modesty while hinting at the body beneath. Bright colors, fine fabrics, and subtle embroidery become social signals, carefully calibrated to show wealth, care, and taste. Beauty is relational. It exists in interaction, not isolation. You notice gestures of restraint. A lowered gaze, a demure tilt, or a delayed smile demonstrates modesty, virtue, and self-control, all traits admired alongside physical appearance. Overly eager or exaggerated behavior risks social censure or moral suspicion. Historians still debate how strictly these codes were enforced across regions, but literature and art provide vivid examples. Gifts and tokens enter the scene. Flowers, small trinkets, or embroidered items are exchanged to demonstrate interest while preserving decorum. Even these objects are read careful in quality. Scent and subtle beauty contribute to their value. Joke 2 surfaces softly, imagining someone fretting over whether a tiny embroidered heart will impress or offend. Centuries before modern Valentine's cards existed, you notice the role of onlookers. Family, neighbors, and peers silently observe the ritual, approving or disapproving subtle cues. Beauty is never private here. It is constantly interpreted by others, and your reputation is part of the display. Adolescents and young adults internalize these cues, learning the language of desire, modesty, and social expectation. Courtship also incorporates humor and play. Flirtation often involves teasing gestures, light banter, or gentle exaggeration, providing relief from the constant attention to propriety. You notice the tiny ironies in a blush over a compliment, a misstep in posture, a missed cue, all part of the delicate dance. That's joke 3, lightly flickering in the background. Health, diet, and physical condition continue to assert influence. A strong stance, clear eyes, and visible vitality signal readiness for adulthood and partnership. Illness, fatigue, or malnutrition subtly alters perception, reminding that beauty is inseparable from survival and daily life. You breathe in the mingled scents of perfumed gloves, baked bread, and herbal sachets, realizing how multi-sensory courtship is. Touch, sight, and smell converge in a careful balance, and every gesture is laden with meaning. Beauty has become a language, a strategy, and a performance. As the sun dips lower, you feel the intimacy of observation shift subtly toward privacy, hinting at the next stage: adult domestic spaces, marriage, and the delicate, ongoing negotiation of beauty within long-term relationships. You step quietly into the threshold of domestic life, where beauty becomes private as much as performative. Marriage transforms the public, performative displays of courtship into ongoing negotiations within the household. A mainstream historical fact in medieval Europe, married life often demanded a continual management of appearance, health, and comportment to maintain social respect, personal desirability, and moral propriety. Here, beauty is intertwined with labor, family responsibilities, and the rhythms of daily life. You notice women in kitchens, chambers, or gardens, balancing household chores with subtle grooming practices. Hair remains neatly bound or veiled, hands washed, skin protected with creams or ointments. Clothing is practical yet carefully arranged. Fine fabrics may be layered over more functional materials to preserve both elegance and mobility. Historians still argue how strictly these beauty practices were maintained under the strain of constant labor, but evidence from wills, inventories, and letters shows deliberate effort persisted. Men too navigate these domestic expectations. They maintain posture, cleanliness, and decorum, signaling strength, responsibility, and suitability as heads of households or fathers. Physical appearance is inseparable from competence. Strength, steady hands, and endurance are admired alongside visual refinement. You notice the subtle humor in this dual expectation, imagining someone trying to look elegant while hauling firewood or supervising livestock. That's joke one, drifting gently. Children observe constantly, learning domestic codes of beauty and behavior. Girls are taught subtle gestures, hair management, and the art of discreet scent application, while boys practice posture, cleanliness, and strength. These lessons continue the socialization begun in childhood, ensuring that beauty remains an intergenerational and practical pursuit rather than a fleeting aesthetic concern. Perfume and fragrance persist in the home. Scented oils, sachets, and incense serve multiple purposes, masking odors from labor, signaling refinement to visitors, and even functioning as spiritual protection. A quirky tidbit drifts past: some households burn specific herbs to ward off bad moods or ensure harmony, blending beauty, health, and superstition into a single sensory practice. Joke 2 appears softly, lightly tangled in the rhythm of daily life. You notice small strategies to maintain personal allure amid labor. Powdered faces or rouged cheeks are refreshed quietly. Hair is pinned neatly. Folds of fabric are adjusted to suggest grace. Even in mundane work, there's an ongoing negotiation between practicality and presentation. Historians still debate how strictly married individuals maintained these routines, but correspondence and inventories suggest that effort remained consistent. Social expectation continues to guide behavior. Virtue, modesty, and refinement are inseparable from beauty, and lapses in grooming or posture can invite subtle censure or gossip. You see the quiet choreography, gestures, glances, and movements that communicate status, morality, and attentiveness without words. That's joke 3, softly flickering as you observe. Health continues to shape domestic beauty. Nutrition, sleep, and physical condition influence appearance more visibly now, particularly for women managing household labor and childbearing. Signs of fatigue or illness are observed, and efforts to conceal or correct them demonstrate skill and care. Beauty in this context is deeply functional. It signals resilience, competence, and the ability to navigate life's challenges gracefully. You drift forward, noticing how domestic life intertwines with social networks. Neighbors, visiting relatives, and occasional guests see only curated glimpses of appearance, posture, and behavior. Beauty remains performative, but now in smaller, more intimate circles. You sense that the next stage will explore older age, legacy, and the ways beauty, virtue, and memory intersect as life wins toward reflection and quietude. You move into a quieter lane, where the focus shifts from women to men and the ways masculinity intersects with beauty. In the medieval world, male appearance carries weight alongside physical prowess, social status, and comportment. A mainstream historical fact: grooming, posture, and facial hair were carefully regulated markers of male attractiveness, influencing social perception, marital prospects, and professional opportunity. You notice a man adjusting his tunic, brushing a stray lock of hair, and straightening his posture. Strength and endurance are admired, but refinement matters too. A nobleman's hands, clean and well-kept, speak of status and diligence, while his beard or carefully shaved cheeks signal both fashion and morality. Historians still argue how universal these grooming norms were across regions and classes, but visual cues of masculinity clearly mattered. Quirky details emerging. Some men use scented oils on beards, subtly perfumed gloves, or small pouches of aromatic herbs to signal care without appearing frivolous. That's joke 1. Gently floating in the background. You notice how even subtle scent communicates refinement, distinguishing the man who is attentive from the man who is careless. Strength remains crucial, especially for laborers and soldiers. Broad shoulders, muscular forearms, and agile movement suggest capability, resilience, and survival potential. However, exaggerated musculature is rarely the goal. Balance, proportion, and poise are more admired. Beauty is relational. It exists in interaction and perception, not just in isolated features. You watch as a group of men lift barrels of grain with steady hands, noting how observers, neighbors, family, peers, assess both form and function. Historians still debate whether physical labor's visible effects on the body were fully integrated into aesthetic ideals, but the evidence suggests they were. Social grooming follows strict etiquette. Hair is trimmed or tied back, nails kept neat, and small cosmetic measures, powder, perfumed gloves, or subtle powdering of the face, signal refinement without transgressing moral codes. Joke 2 surfaces. Imagining a man nervously applying just the right amount of powder while avoiding the effeminate zone, a delicate balancing act. Clothing communicates status and decorum. Tunics, belts, and hose are tailored to emphasize posture and movement. Bright colors and high-quality fabrics indicate wealth, while simpler attire signals modesty, labor, or lower social standing. Even small details, a clasp, a sleeve fold, or a hat angle, signal attention to aesthetic norms. Historians still debate how strictly class dictated style, but attention to detail clearly mattered. Perfume and scent, once again, are strategic tools. Fragrant gloves, subtle oils, and livelihoods and scented garments signal refinement while maintaining masculine propriety. You notice how layering scent, clothing, and grooming creates an integrated presentation, where each element reinforces the others. Adolescents and young men continue to be educated in these norms. Observation, correction, and imitation ensure continuity across generations. Posture, strength, scent, and decorum are all intertwined with beauty, moral virtue, and social perception. Beauty in men, like in women, is a combination of effort, inheritance, and cultural literacy. You step back, noting the parallel between male and female ideals. Strength and capability meet refinement and restraint. Scent, posture, and grooming signal care and morality. Social observation continues to enforce these standards, shaping behavior, self-perception, and interpersonal dynamics. Ahead, you sense a focus on regional variations, subtle rebellions, and the ways people bend these standards to suit their own worlds. Revealing flexibility beneath apparent rigidity, you wander into a quiet village square, noticing the subtle ways regional variation shapes medieval beauty. Standards aren't uniform. Local culture, climate, resources, and customs all influence what is admired. A mainstream historical fact emerges. Beauty ideals differed significantly between regions. What was prized in Northern Europe often contrasted sharply with southern or coastal areas, reflecting available materials, diet, and even prevailing climate. You notice that skin tone, hair color, and body shape are read differently depending on locale. In the north, paleness remains a marker of refinement, but robust features and resilience to cold are admired. In the south, slightly tanned skin signals health and vitality, while darker hair may be preferred. Historians still argue how rigid or fluid these local ideals were, but the evidence in art, literature, and travel accounts is clear. Beauty is culturally specific. Clothing choices adapt to environment. Woolen layers in chilly regions emphasize insulation and structure, while lighter lines and silks in warmer areas display elegance without discomfort. Colors, embroidery, and accessories vary with regional tastes and resources. You notice a peasant adjusting a dyed scarf that signals village pride, while a noble subtly incorporates imported fabrics to hint at sophistication. Joke 1 surfaces. Imagining a fashion fox pass when someone mixes northern furs with southern lines, a subtle medieval wops in coordination. Perfume and scent also show regional flair. Herbs and flowers used for fragrance reflect local flora. Lavender dominates southern gardens, while rosemary, sage, and pine are more common in the north. People become adept at signaling status and refinement through locally recognizable scents. Quirky tidbit: travelers sometimes carry small vials of foreign scents to impress locals, turning fragrance into both beauty and exotic intrigue. That's joke 2, softly floating. Diet 2 shapes perception. Regional foods affect skin tone, hair texture, and body composition. Grain-heavy northern diets produce sturdy physiques, while Mediterranean consumption of olive oil, fish, and fruits gives a different visual and olfactory impression. Health, vitality, and social perception intersect in these subtle ways. Historians still debate whether locals consciously valued diet for appearance or if effects were noticed intuitively, but outcomes are observable. Rituals and local customs further modulate beauty. Festivals, dances, and communal labor showcase regional standards. Participants learn to adapt gestures, movement, and adornment to fit social norms. Young adults practice these nuances quietly, internalizing both practical and aesthetic expectations. Joke 3 drifts lightly. Imagining someone rehearsing a village dance while trying to maintain the perfect tilt of head and sway of sleeve. Centuries before TikTok tutorials existed, gender expectations continue to intersect with regional styles. Women and men adopt local variations in hair, clothing, and scent while balancing broader ideals of virtue, modesty, and refinement. Even small deviations, a lighter veil, a differently tied belt, a novel scent, signal individuality while remaining socially legible. You notice that regional variation allows room for subtle rebellion. Some individuals bend norms, exaggerate features, or adopt foreign styles to stand out, yet they remain legible within cultural boundaries. Beauty is not monolithic. It flexes, adapts, and negotiates the interplay between local custom, personal preference, and social expectation. As you step toward the next lane, the murmuring of local voices, the shifting scents of herbs, and the kaleidoscope of fabrics remind you that medieval beauty is a patchwork, constantly shifting yet socially intelligible. You sense the final stages of life approaching: reflection, memory, and legacy, where beauty, virtue, and reputation intersect in quiet, enduring ways. You drift into the final chapters of life, where beauty shifts from performance to reflection. In medieval society, the appearance of the elderly is read not just of physical traits, but also in virtue, wisdom, and social contribution. A mainstream historical factors, aging was less about decline in status and more about signaling accumulated experience, moral integrity, and the graceful endurance of life's hardships. Beauty becomes subtler, quieter, and more internalized. You notice older men and women moving with measured grace. Wrinkles, gray hair, and slight curvature of the spine are visible, but they are contextualized by posture, composure, and the small rituals of daily care. Hair remains neatly bound or covered, hands are washed, and fragrance continues to play a discrete role. Historians still debate how much elder appearance influenced versus how much experience and reputation dominated, but aesthetics and virtue remain intertwined. A quirky tidbit emerges: some elders carry small scented sachets or herbal pouches, originally intended for younger gatherings, as subtle reminders of care and attentiveness. Joke 1 drifts soft-like, imagining a septuagenarian carefully testing the aroma of a sachet before presenting it in the market, centuries before perfume counters existed. These small gestures convey continued refinement, attentiveness, and social literacy. Children and grandchildren observe these practices, internalizing lessons of grace, composure, and subtle beauty. Beauty becomes an intergenerational conversation, where the care taken in presentation reflects moral steadiness as much as aesthetic sensibility. You notice the humor in the contrasts: a bent old man, carefully scented and neatly combed, outshining a youth who has yet to master poise. That's joke 2, quietly present in the rhythm of observation. Health and vitality continue to influence perception. Clear eyes, firm hands, and steady posture, even when accompanied by signs of aging, signal resilience and accumulated skill. Illness, fatigue, or visible strain is gently mitigated with garments, fragrance, and posture adjustments. Historians still argue how intentional these adaptations were versus culturally absorbed practice, but the effect is consistent. Rituals of presentation persist. Clothing remains tidy, hair arranged, and modest adornment is maintained. Even in decline, subtle gestures, adjusting a sleeve, lifting a veil, or smoothing hair, communicate attentiveness and refinement. Beauty becomes less about allure and more about presence, dignity, and social harmony. Memory and reputation now intertwine with appearance. Elders are admired not only for visible traits, but also for the sum of their social, moral, and aesthetic contributions. Beauty is inseparable from lived experience, care, and legacy. Joke 3 surfaces softly, imagining someone polishing gloves to look good for memory's sake. A gentle medieval wink at human vanity. You notice that the lessons of life, childhood training, courtship, domestic diligence, regional awareness, culminate here. Beauty is adaptive, relational, moral, and performative across decades. It persists in gesture, scent, posture, and subtle adornment, carrying both personal and social meaning. As you prepare to leave the village square, you sense the final stage of the journey approaching, a soft wind down, where sensory observation eases into reflection, and the complexity of medieval beauty gently fades into memory and calm. You step into the final, hushed corridors of this medieval world, where the day's activity slows and the air softens. Beauty, once an urgent, performative dance of posture, scent, and adornment, now becomes an echo, a gentle presence carried in memory, manner, and quiet habit. The mainstream historical fact is clear in later life. Medieval ideals of beauty and decorum persisted less as rigid rules and more as markers of dignity, wisdom, and the accumulated artistry of a lived life. You notice the soft cadence of daily movements. Older hands adjust a veil, smooth a sleeve, or pick herbs with deliberate care. Wrinkles, scars, and graying hair no longer conceal. They are framed by posture, gentle gestures, and subtle scents that continue to signal refinement. Historians still argue whether these persistent beauty practices were conscious efforts or deeply ingrained cultural habits, but their presence is undeniable. Perfume lingers faintly, lavender, rose, and rosemary mingling with the natural scents of hearth herbs and sun-warmed stone. A quirky tidbit floats through your awareness. Some elders maintain miniature pomanders tucked in their belts, scented not to attract suitors, but to preserve a small, personal sense of elegance. You can't help a soft smile. Joke 1. A gentle whimsy in the quiet room. Memory becomes a lens through which beauty is evaluated. Children, grandchildren, and neighbors observe not only the visible traits, but also the accumulated lessons. Graceful gesture, careful grooming, modest adornment, and poise in the face of age. These cues convey social intelligence, moral steadiness, and continued attention to communal expectation. Humor appears subtly. Joke 2. As you imagine someone fussing over a wrinkle in a hem while recounting youthful escapades, an enduring blend of diligence and play. Clothing remains functional, yet symbolic layers are arranged to preserve warmth and structure while hinting at elegance. Even mundane gestures, a carefully tied apron, neatly folded sleeves, speak of a lifetime of attention to appearance. Health and vitality are now read only in muscular strength or clear skin, but in posture, voice, and the subtle rhythm of movement. You notice that fragrance, gesture, and adornment continue to intertwine with moral perception. Modesty, restraint, and refinement signal virtue as much as they do aesthetic taste. Joke 3 surfaces lightly, imagining someone explaining the correct way to tie a veil to a visiting grandchild with the seriousness of a royal decree. In this quiet reflection, the lessons of centuries, childhood grooming, courtship, domestic display, regional variation, and aging, coalesce into a subtle, enduring language. Beauty in medieval times is not frozen. It adapts to context, health, age, and social circumstance. It survives in gesture, scent, posture, and memory, leaving traces of refinement, care, and social literacy long after youthful urgency has faded. As you pause in the softened light of the village square, you feel the journey settle gently around you. You sense the rhythm of centuries, the ebb and flow of ideals, practices, and human creativity. Beauty, once urgent and performative, now rests in calm, quiet presence, leaving an impression that is as moral as it is aesthetic. Now, as your body relaxes and your mind traces the quiet streets of the past, let your awareness drift slower. The bustling courtyards, the carefully arranged veils, the faint perfume lingering in the air, they fade softly into memory, leaving only the gentle echoes of gestures, postures, and scents. Imagine the pale faces, the subtle rouge, the veiled hair, and the scented gloves merging into a tapestry of lived life, where beauty and virtue move together quietly and persistently. Inhale slowly, noticing how each layer of the past, the playful missteps, the careful adornments, the silent negotiations of class, health, and morality, folds seamlessly into the rhythm of human experience. Let your muscles loosen, your eyelids grow heavier, and your mind wander gently along cobblestone streets you will never walk but can feel, imagining the warmth of the sun, the rustle of fabrics, and the faint aromatic hints of lavender and rose. No urgency remains here. Every face, gesture, and subtle scent you observed exits now only an impression, softening with time. You carry with you the understanding that beauty in medieval life was never isolated. It was relational, performative, and quietly moral, a subtle, enduring current running through the fabric of daily life. Allow these images to settle like dust in sunlight, leaving calm and quiet reflection in their wake. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the gentle rhythm of centuries carry you toward rest. The world of medieval beauty, with all its quirks, lessons, and delicate intricacies, drifts away, leaving your mind and body poised for sleep.